The church was alive with whispers long before the ceremony began, the kind of low hum that rises when too many secrets gather in one place. Sunlight poured through the tall stained glass windows, scattering colors across polished pews and embroidered gowns. Every guest had come dressed in their finest, not just because it was a wedding, but because it was this wedding, the union of a millionaire groom and the young woman who had captured his heart. They were here to see wealth meet beauty, power join with grace, and to be part of a story they would later tell over wine and dinner. Daniel Whitmore, the groom, stood at the altar with his hands clasped behind his back, every inch the image of control. His tuxedo fit like it had been sewn onto him, his hair perfectly slicked, his eyes carrying that sharp glint of confidence people often mistake for integrity. He was young, rich, and dangerously charming. He had built his fortune through risky investments, some fair, others not so much. Yet no one dared to question him. To most, he was the dream every parent wanted for their daughter. Handsome, successful, polished, the sort of man who made promises sound like guarantees. Beside him stood Clara Bennett, radiant in a gown of white lace, her veil falling gently over her shoulders, a bouquet trembling in her hands. Her beauty wasn't just in her dress but in the way her eyes lit up when she smiled. She was nervous, yes, but hopeful, believing she was about to step into a fairy tale. She had told her friends this was her forever moment, the beginning of a life filled with love and security. Clara wanted to believe Daniel was as good as he looked, that money hadn't hardened him, that she could be the one who softened his edges. She clung to that dream, blind to the storm gathering behind her. At the far end of the church stood Rosa, the maid. Her uniform was plain, a light blue dress with white trim, her silver hair pulled back into a neat bun. To the guests, she was nearly invisible. She had worked for Daniel's family for years, dusting shelves, polishing silver, changing linens. She knew which drawers held receipts, which jackets still smelled of perfume not belonging to Clara, which secrets were hidden in the folds of expensive suits. She had seen too much, and her conscience weighed heavier than the mop she carried daily. Tucked into her pocket was a letter. The ink was Daniel's, the words intimate, passionate, and not meant for Clara. Rosa had found it while tidying Daniel's study one night. He had written it to another woman, Elise, promising her devotion, vowing that the wedding meant nothing, that appearances were everything. Rosa had folded the letter, telling herself to forget it, but every time she saw Clara's hopeful smile, the guilt dug deeper. She could not let the bride walk into chains disguised as rings. The ceremony began. The priest spoke of love and loyalty, of vows sacred and binding. Clara's eyes never left Daniel's, her lips trembling with anticipation. The crowd leaned forward, ready for the kiss, the exchange, the happily ever after. That was when Rosa's heart pounded against her chest so hard she thought it might burst. She rose from her place in the back and walked slowly down the aisle. The sound of her shoes echoed in the silence. Guests turned, confused. A maid, at the altar. Murmurs rippled as phones came up to record. Rosa reached the front, pulled the letter from her pocket, and pointed her trembling hand at Daniel. Her voice shook at first but grew stronger as it left her lips. Before you promise her forever, she deserves to know who you really are. The room erupted in gasps. The priest froze. Clara's head whipped around, her eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel's face drained of color. What do you mean? Clara demanded, her voice cracking. Rosa unfolded the letter and held it high. This man you are marrying has already broken his vows before they were spoken. He writes to another woman, telling her he loves her, telling her this ceremony is only for show. Clara's bouquet slipped from her hands, petals scattering like broken dreams across the marble floor. She turned to Daniel, desperate for denial. Tell me it's not true. Please, say something. But Daniel's lips parted with no words. His silence was a confession louder than anything he could have spoken. Guests gasped again. Some shook their heads. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Phones zoomed in to capture Clara's tears. Rosa's hand shook, but her voice did not. I could not watch you walk into a life of lies. Better the pain of truth now than a lifetime of betrayal. Clara's fists clenched, her face twisting with rage and heartbreak. Daniel, how could you? Was any of this real? Daniel finally stammered. Clara, I never meant for you to find out this way. The words cut deeper than silence. Clara's body trembled. You never meant for me to know at all, she spat. The priest lowered his head, unable to continue. The fairy tale had ended before it began. Daniel's mask crumbled as whispers rose louder. Guests recording, Gossiping, already imagining tomorrow's headlines, millionaire groom exposed at altar. His empire of pride cracked in an instant. Clara, standing before him, transformed from the adoring bride into a woman carved by betrayal. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was strong. "This wedding is over," she declared. The church erupted into chaos. Guests stood, whispering, some rushing forward, others hurrying out, scandal buzzing like hornets. Daniel collapsed onto a pew, his head in his hands, drowning in humiliation. Clara tore off her veil and turned away, her dress trailing behind her like broken wings. Rosa stepped forward to steady her, whispering, "You are free now, child. Free from a cage you never knew you were stepping into." Clara looked at Rosa through tears and nodded. Together, they walked down the aisle, past the stunned crowd, out into the sunlight where the air was clearer, lighter, honest. The air outside felt like the first breath after a long swim. Clara stood on the stone steps blinking at the light, the veil loosened from its pins and gathering at her elbow. The city moved as if nothing had happened, buses sighing, pigeons disputing a crumb, a street performer blowing bubbles that rose and burst with tiny pops. She held the railing to steady the tremor in her legs. Rosa stayed at her side, a quiet anchor in blue. "I don't know where to go," Clara whispered. The words surprised her. She had planned 100 versions of this day, but none of them involved open doors with nowhere to walk. "You go somewhere small," Rosa said, "and sit where your heart can touch the ground again." They crossed to a bench beneath the church's thick stone arch. A bridesmaid found them there and shed her bouquet into Clara's lap like a field laid gently down. Another friend brought water. The priest, having led the remaining guests into a soft, practical dispersal, came briefly to place a hand on Clara's shoulder and murmured a blessing that did not ask for anything in return. Through the open doors came the clatter of chairs and the thin, disbelieving laughter of people who tell themselves they will remember this forever and secretly pray they will forget. Daniel did not emerge. Clara tried not to think about where he was, or who he would be when he finally stood. "Why did you do it?" Clara asked, turning to Rosa. The question held no accusation, only the ache of a torn seam. "Because I have daughters," Rosa said, "and because I used to be one. The first time I kept silent, it ate at me until I could taste metal in my mouth. I promised I would not be silent again when truth could save a woman time." Clara looked at the letter Rosa still held. "May I?" Rosa placed it in her hands. The paper was warm, softened at the corners by worry and resolve. Clara read the words once, twice. They were intimate and cowardly at the same time, all heat and no light. She folded the letter carefully and gave it back. "He might have told me later," she said, almost to herself. But later is the country where all liars live. They left before the photographers could turn the steps into a stage. A friend drove Clara to her small apartment, the one she'd kept, just in case, the way a swimmer keeps a hand on the edge of the pool the first time they cross. Inside, she peeled out of the gown as if removing a bandage. She stood in the shower until the water cooled and the last clinging piece of ceremony slid down the drain. When she emerged in a soft sweater and old jeans, Rosa was at her table with 2 cups of tea and a bag of sugar cookies that looked comically cheerful. They sat across from each other as the afternoon thinned to evening. Between them lay a quiet that did not demand performance. "What do I do tomorrow?" Clara asked. "You make the bed," Rosa said. "You open the window. You eat the apple on the counter before it bruises. Then you make a list of things that are yours." She smiled, a small lift that made the ears at the sides of her eyes fold like pages. "You will be shocked how long the list is." Clara began. She wrote, "My keys. My plant that refuses to die. The painting I haven't finished. My laugh, even if I don't hear it for a while. The phone numbers of people who call me back." She found herself breathing with the pen, slower, heavier, real. News traveled faster than healing. By dusk, the story had climbed across screens and into dinner tables. Some people admired Clara's strength, others claimed she had staged it, because some minds cannot imagine courage without an audience. That night, Clara silenced her phone. Her friends took shifts answering the doorbell. Rosa slept on the sofa and told anyone who asked for a quote, "No comment. Drink water. Be kind." In the weeks that followed, life did what it always does, it took a step, then another. Clara returned the gifts, each parcel a gentle funeral. She met with the venue manager, the florist, the bandleader. Most of them were kinder than contracts required. The seamstress, a woman with fingers stained by work and hope, refused payment for last-minute alterations. Keep it, she said, caressing the lace. Put it in a thrift store. Let another girl write a new story inside it. Clara took a job she had wanted once but considered beneath the future she had imagined, managing a tiny gallery on a side street that smelled of coffee and rain. The owner, a woman who wore paint under her nails like jewelry, hired her after a 10-minute conversation and a silent reading of Clara's tired eyes. She paid little but gave Clara a key and a stool to sit and breathe. On slow days Clara unboxed prints, wrote captions in soft pencil, brewed tea. On busy days she answered questions and learned to tell the difference between people who wanted to be moved and people who wanted to be seen moving. Daniel, for his part, did not vanish. After a week of hiding and a day of wandering a city that seemed suddenly larger, he asked Rosa for a meeting at a small diner near the bus stop. She arrived early and sat where she could see the door. He entered wearing a cheaper suit than usual and a face from which the shine had been peeled. "I need to thank you," he said, foregoing the lie he had rehearsed. "And I need to ask what a decent apology looks like." "Not a performance," Rosa replied. "Not a plan to earn anything back. Words that admit a harm you cannot fix, spoken without bending them to make yourself look brave." He took out a notebook like a schoolboy. To Clara, to Elise, and to the people whose work you took credit for when a headline needed a hero. You made yourself the sun and called everyone else warm because of you. That is not how warmth works. He wrote until the waitress, amused, topped off his coffee for the third time. Rosa watched him without praise. She had raised 2 sons and knew the difference between learning and pretending to learn. When they parted, she pressed exact change into his palm for her pie. "I do not owe you this," she said. "I am paying because I prefer clean pages." Daniel mailed the letters. He did not ask if they were received. He sold a car, then another. He resigned from a board where he had been the youngest voice and the loudest. He asked his legal team to remove the non-disclosure clause from the severance agreements of 3 former assistants. One of them, free to speak, wrote a furious, funny essay that named his smallest cruelties. He read it twice and did not call his lawyer. Sometimes growth is choosing your silence. Elise did not reply. Clara did, weeks later, with a note the length of a palm. "I hope you become the man you pretend to be. Do it far from me." He pressed the card between 2 pages of his notebook and closed it like a door. Rosa kept working, but not in Daniel's house. She applied to the community center 2 neighborhoods away and was hired in a day for a job that listed maintenance, and turned out to include every verb that makes a place human: sweep, fix, listen, laugh, notice. She opened the building each morning before the sun, her card rattling softly in halls where children would soon run. In the evenings she sat in the reading room and taught anyone who came how to write letters that told the truth without setting the desk on fire. People came. A boy who wanted to apologize to his sister for selling her headphones, a woman who needed to tell her mother she was moving, an old man who had not written since his army days and cried when the ink began its slow river again. Rosa did not call this class anything. She simply put a sign by the door that read, "Paper and quiet." The city learned to shrug at the wedding that wasn't, the way cities always do. An influencer was caught in a lie. A dog rescued a child from a fountain. The seasons changed. Clara let her hair grow. She collected small things that pleased her: bus tickets with pretty numbers, a chipped mug that kept tea warmer than any new cup, the habit of walking home by the long street because the trees there were clumsy and generous. Sometimes she woke with a weight on her chest and lay still until it lifted. Those were the mornings she wrote lists again: things I can do today, things it is okay not to do. One afternoon, months later, a courier brought a package the size of a shoe box. Inside was a small sculpture wrapped in brown paper and kindness. The note was unsigned: "For the gallery. For the woman who did not marry the man who needed her confusion." Clara set the piece, 2 hands loosening a knot, on the front table. People stood before it longer than before the larger works. Some cried. The owner printed a label that simply read, "Untying." In early winter, the church hosted a food drive. Clara volunteered to sort tins by date. Rosa ran the table for blankets. Daniel arrived unannounced in a plain jacket, carrying boxes. A volunteer directed him toward the steps where Clara worked. He paused when he saw her, then set the boxes by her feet. "I won't make a speech," he said. "I came to carry." "Wait, if my presence is wrong, I'll go." "It's a public event," Clara replied, and she meant the safety of the words. They sorted in silence. Twice he misread a date and she corrected him without edge. When the boxes were empty, They stood with empty hands in full air. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am learning how to be," she said. "Which is better than pretending." He nodded and did not ask for more. Before he left, he crossed to Rosa. She measured him with a glance, found him smaller in the right ways, and handed him a wool cap from the donations. "Wear it," she said. "Thinking is colder than you expect." On the shortest day of the year, Clara passed the church alone. The doors were open, and light gathered inside like a good secret. She entered and sat in the last pew, just as she had the week after the wedding. It was quieter now, no cameras, no whispers, only the soft breath of wood and stone. She lit a candle for her younger self and set it in the tray beside a candle Rosa had lit earlier for all girls who learn fast. The twin flames leaned into one another and then held their own. When she rose to leave, she met Rosa coming down the aisle with a bucket and a smile. They walked to the doors side by side. The air outside tasted of snow. A group of children ran past, their laughter making crumbs of shadow. Clara watched them disappear around the corner and felt something unfasten in her chest. Not a knot, not anymore, just a ribbon returning to wind. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, meaning the day Rosa had stepped forward. Rosa looked at the sunlight laying itself across the threshold. "Regret would mean I wish we had been different people," she said. "I only wish for us to be more ourselves, sooner." They stood there, two silhouettes in a doorway, until the cold nudged them down the steps. Clara pulled up her hood, Rosa tightened her scarf, and they walked in the same direction a few blocks before parting with a squeeze of hands. At the corner, Clara turned and saw Rosa continue straight, shoulders square, stride steady, a woman who had made a habit of opening doors and then walking proudly through them. The sight placed a small, brave warmth in Clara's pocket, a thing to take out on the nights when the world grew too tidy and required again the honest, saving mess of truth.